Your feet sink into the floor of a great medieval hall. We picture these spaces as stone and tapestry, yet for centuries, the ground beneath most people was simply earth. This video uncovers why an entire civilization built its life upon dirt. You will gain a completely new understanding of medieval homes, seeing them not as dark and filthy, but as ingeniously practical. We will explore how a floor made of mud could be a mark of status, and why the wealthiest lords sometimes chose it over stone. What does the ground we walk on say about the people who lived there? This simple fact reshapes our entire image of the medieval world. For every grand stone cathedral floor, there were thousands upon thousands of homes where the foundation of daily life was packed earth. Archaeological digs from England to Poland consistently reveal the same story. The soil inside a building's foundation is not just random dirt, it is a carefully prepared, compacted living surface. In peasant longhouses, the entire family lived, worked, and slept on this earthen floor, but it did not stop at the cottage door. The ground floors of many early manor houses, and even the great halls of some timber castles, were simply well-trodden earth. Think of the bustling activity in such a space, the coming and going of people and animals, the hauling of firewood and goods. A stone floor here would be impractical and astonishingly expensive. The rarity of stone flooring cannot be overstated. Quarrying, shaping, and transporting stone was a monumental task, consuming vast labor and wealth. It was a luxury material, reserved primarily for the houses of God, churches and monasteries, and for specific, symbolic rooms in a lord's residence, like the solar or a chapel. Even in a stone castle keep, you might find an earthen floor in the basement storage areas or the kitchen, where durability against dropped pots and heavy traffic was more valued than prestige. So when we mentally walk into a medieval building, the default assumption should not be cold stone, but the resilient, forgiving surface of the earth itself. It was a universal technology, understood by everyone from the poorest farmer to the richest baron. This shared foundation connects us to their reality in a very tactile way. What secrets, then, were held in this common ground? That resilient, forgiving earth was also astonishingly cheap. In a world where nearly every resource was scarce, the floor beneath your feet was one thing you did not have to purchase. The raw material was literally underfoot, available in unlimited quantities just outside your door. Anyone with a spade, some water, and strong backs could prepare a serviceable floor. There were no middlemen, no shipping costs, no master craftsmen demanding high wages. This fundamental economics made earth the universal starting point. To understand its dominance, you need to contrast it with the staggering alternatives. Stone was not just a luxury, it was a logistical nightmare. First, you needed a suitable quarry, which might be miles away. Then came the back-breaking labor of extracting massive blocks, followed by the even more complex task of shaping them with chisels and hammers into flat slabs, a skill possessed by highly paid masons. Now you had to move them. Without modern machinery, this meant loading them onto ox-drawn carts that crept along muddy tracks, a process so slow and expensive that the cost of stone could double with every mile it traveled. For a peasant building a home, or even a minor lord furnishing a manor, this was an unthinkable expense. The other option was fired clay tiles. While more affordable than stone in some regions, they still required a specialized industry. You needed clay pits, kilns that burned enormous amounts of precious firewood for days, and skilled potters to produce them consistently. Then, like stone, they had to be transported and carefully laid. For the vast majority of people living hand to mouth, devoting that much labor and fuel to something as basic as a floor was a wasteful extravagance. Their economy was one of subsistence, where every ounce of effort was directed toward food, shelter, and survival. A dirt floor was not a sign of poverty in the way we think of it today. It was a brilliant, pragmatic allocation of limited resources. It solved the problem of a durable, cleanable surface without consuming any of the capital or labor needed for more pressing concerns. So when a lord did invest in a stone floor for his personal chamber, it was a breathtaking display of wealth, a silent proclamation that he could afford to divert immense labor and money toward pure prestige. For everyone else, the economics were clear. Dirt was not just good enough, it was the intelligent choice. But if it was just about being cheap, why did these earthen floors last for generations without turning into a muddy swamp? But that pragmatic dirt floor offered far more than just low cost. It provided a hidden comfort crucial for survival, insulation. In a time before central heating and double-glazed windows, keeping warm was a constant, consuming struggle. A stone floor, for all its prestige, was a liability in winter. Stone is an excellent conductor of heat, meaning it would swiftly pull any precious warmth from the room and from your feet, leaving a permanent chill. An earthen floor, however, worked in the opposite way. When properly prepared, a thick layer of packed earth acts as what is called a thermal mass. Think of it like a heat battery for your home. Throughout the day, the central hearth or fire pit would radiate warmth, and the dense earth floor would absorb and store that heat within its very fabric. Then, as the fire died down and the bitter cold of night set in, the floor would begin its slow, steady release. It would gently radiate that stored warmth back into the room, tempering the chill and creating a more stable, bearable environment for sleeping. This was not a small detail. It was the difference between shivering on a cold, leaching surface and resting on one that passively gave back the day's heat. Furthermore, a well-made earth floor was a surprisingly effective barrier against damp. The key was in its construction. It was not just loose soil thrown inside. It was a carefully built-up sandwich of materials. Builders would often start with a layer of gravel for drainage, then add alternating layers of clay, sand, and sometimes even crushed limestone or animal blood as a binder, each layer being thoroughly soaked and compacted by trampling or with heavy beaters. This created a hard, almost concrete-like surface that was impervious to water rising from the ground below. In contrast, a stone floor laid directly on the earth, within a modern damp-proof membrane, could become a cold, wet slab, encouraging mold and making the whole space feel clammy and unhealthy. So, in a drafty timber hall with gaps in the walls, that humble floor was a silent partner in the fight for comfort. It was a living part of the home's ecosystem, actively working to moderate the harshness of the outside world. The lord on his raised dais might have had a rug or woven mats, but beneath them, even in his hall, it was often this engineered earth doing the vital work of keeping the chill at bay. This leads us to a fascinating question. If earth was so practical and widespread, why did it eventually disappear from our homes? So how did you transform a patch of raw ground into a living, breathing floor? The process was both an art and a science, passed down through generations. It began with careful site preparation. The area inside the foundation walls was first cleared of all vegetation and roots, which could rot and cause the floor to settle unevenly. Next, builders dug down to a stable subsoil, removing the loose, organic topsoil. The ideal base was often a clay-rich earth, prized for its natural binding properties when wet. This clay subsoil became the core ingredient. It was dug up, broken into smaller clods, and spread back over the prepared area, but raw clay alone could crack and crumble. To give it strength and flexibility, binders were mixed in thoroughly. This is where local resources and ingenuity shone. Chopped straw or dried grasses were common, their fibrous strands acting like natural reinforcement, preventing large cracks from forming as the floor dried and settled. In some places, they might add sand to improve drainage, or even animal blood, which contains albumin, a protein that acts as a powerful natural glue when it dries, creating an incredibly hard surface. Once the mixture was ready, the real work began. Water was added slowly, and the mass was kneaded by foot or with tools until it reached a thick, plastic consistency, like a very stiff dough. This damp mixture was then spread in layers, each only a few inches thick. The secret to its legendary durability was compaction. Using heavy, flat-bottomed wooden beaters or stone rollers, often worked by teams of people, they would pound and tamp each layer relentlessly. This was back-breaking, rhythmic labor, sometimes accompanied by songs or chants to keep time. The goal was to drive out all the air pockets and force the particles to knit together into a dense, homogeneous mass. Each layer had to dry partially before the next was added, building up the floor's thickness over days or weeks. The final surface might be smoothed with a trowel or a polished stone, and sometimes sealed with a thin wash of animal fat or milk to reduce dust. The result was not merely dirt, it was a manufactured composite material, as hard as concrete and resilient enough to withstand decades of daily life. This is not a job for one person, it was a communal effort, a shared investment in creating the foundation for a home. But even the hardest floor eventually shows its age, requiring the most surprising maintenance ritual of the medieval world. That hardened, composite surface was a living part of the home, and like any living thing, it required care. An earthen floor was never a set-and-forget feature. It demanded a rhythm of maintenance woven into the yearly and daily cycles of medieval life. Every morning began with the same simple act, sweeping. Using brooms made of bundled twigs or heather, the floor was cleared of the previous day's debris, ashes tracked from the hearth, bits of straw, and food scrap. This was not just about tidiness, it was essential hygiene, removing material that could attract pests or start decay. To keep the surface hard and prevent it from powdering into dust, it was periodically dampened with a sprinkle of water, a practice that revitalized the clay's binding properties and settled any loose particles. This routine upkeep kept the floor functional from day to day, but the most significant ritual came seasonally, often in the spring or autumn. Over months of constant use, even the best-made floor would develop wear patterns, dips near the hearth or doorway, small cracks from settling. This is when the household would undertake the process of resurfacing. They would mix a new batch of tempered earth, using the same local clay, straw, and binders, creating a slurry with the consistency of thick mortar. This fresh mixture was then spread in a thin layer over the entire existing floor, filling in all the imperfections. Then, the familiar, back-straining work of compaction began anew, pounding the new layer into seamless union with the old. This annual renewal was as fundamental to the home's upkeep as rethatching a leaky roof or repairing the wattle and daub walls. It was a shared domestic duty, a tangible investment in the comfort and longevity of their living space. Each resurfacing did not erase the history of the floor, it added to it, building up a subtle archaeological record of the family's life within those walls, one compacted layer at a time. This constant cycle of use and renewal meant the floor was never truly finished. It was always a work in progress, adapting and enduring alongside the people who walked upon it. And in that endurance, it held on to more than just footprints. It preserved the microscopic echoes of daily existence. Those layers of earth held more than just history, they hold the key to a great misconception. We look at a dirt floor and instinctively label it as filthy, a symbol of medieval squalor, but the truth is far more nuanced, a story of practical hygiene that challenges our modern assumptions. Yes, a neglected earth floor could become a problem. If it was not regularly swept, or if the house was poorly drained, damp could set in, creating a cold, musty environment. Food scraps left to decay could attract insects and rodents, but to focus only on this potential is to miss the reality of a well-maintained home. For families who cared for their floors with the daily and seasonal rituals we just described, the surface was remarkably clean and even healthy. Certain clays, the very material prized for making these floors, possess natural antimicrobial properties. Minerals within the clay could actually inhibit the growth of bacteria and mold, giving the floor a subtle, built-in defense against decay. Furthermore, a properly compacted earth floor was wonderfully absorbent. A spilled cup of ale or a tracked-in puddle would not pool on the surface, creating a slipping hazard or a long-term damp spot. Instead, it would be quickly drawn into the floor's dense matrix, where the vast surface area of the clay particles would help it evaporate steadily, leaving the walking surface dry. This was a stark contrast to the alternative for the wealthy stone floors covered with loose rushes or straw. While this looked and smelled pleasant when first laid, those rushes quickly became a trap for food scraps, animal droppings, and all manner of debris. They were notoriously difficult to clean thoroughly, often simply having more fresh rushes piled on top of the old, creating a damp, decomposing mat that could fester for months. An earth floor, by comparison, was a solid, cleanable surface. There was also a simple safety benefit. A compacted earth floor does not splinter. In a home where children played barefoot and adults worked long hours, a wooden floor, especially one made of rough planks, could send sharp slivers into unprotected feet. A well-trodden earth surface presented no such danger. It was uniformly firm and smooth, so while our modern sensibilities recoil at the idea of living on the ground, the medieval reality was a careful, managed relationship with a material that was alive, responsive, and when treated with knowledge, surprisingly sanitary. This intelligent use of local material points to a deeper wisdom, one that saw the earth not as something to conquer, but as a partner to be understood. The very ground you walked on spoke volumes about your place in the world. In a society built on rigid hierarchies, the earthen floor was a silent but powerful social marker. Its condition was a direct reflection of a household's resources, diligence, and standing. Walking from a serf's cramped cottage into a prosperous yeoman's timber-framed home, the difference underfoot would have been immediate. In the poorest dwellings, a neglected floor could become rutted and muddy, churned by animals and too often damp, a testament to a life of exhausting labor with little time or energy left for meticulous upkeep. But in the home of a successful farmer or a skilled craftsman, the floor told another story. It would be kept meticulously smooth, hard-packed from years of careful maintenance, swept clean multiple times a day. This was a surface of pride and stability, demonstrating a family's command over their own environment. The quality of the floor was a public declaration of domestic order. For the nobility, the story of the floor became one of deliberate transformation. Their great halls often started with the same pragmatic earth floor as everyone else, a necessity for a space that hosted feasts, crowds, and even horses. But they possessed the means to layer symbolism directly onto that practicality. The most common method was to cover the earth with a fragrant, renewable carpet of fresh rushes or sweet-smelling herbs like meadowsweet and chamomile. This was not merely for comfort or scent. It was a performance of abundance. It showed the Lord could command the labor to gather and replace these materials regularly, and it literally covered the common earth, visually separating his space from the ordinary. The act of strewing herbs was a sensory spectacle, announcing his refinement and wealth with every crushed release of fragrance underfoot. The ultimate display was to conceal the earth entirely. In the private chambers of a castle or a wealthy merchant's townhouse, the earthen floor might be hidden beneath ornate wooden floorboards, a lavish expense that created a raised, clean platform distinctly separate from the ground. Or in the most opulent settings, the earth itself became a canvas. Decoratively painted ceramic tiles, often imported at great cost, were laid directly over a leveled earthen base. These tiles featured intricate patterns, coats of arms, or scenes from stories, transforming the floor from a functional surface into a permanent work of art. This was the final step in the social journey of the medieval floor, from visible, packed earth in the peasant's cottage, to covered earth in the bustling hall, to earth completely erased and replaced by a statement of luxury in the private solar. Each choice, from the sweep of a broom to the laying of a tile, was a coded message about status, written not on parchment, but on the very ground beneath everyone's feet. These social codes were written directly into the ground, and today we can still read them. While very few medieval earthen floors survive perfectly intact for us to walk upon, their story has not been lost. It has been waiting, compacted and preserved, for the archaeologist's trowel to uncover. Through the science of stratigraphy, the study of soil layers, these vanished surfaces speak volumes. When excavating a medieval home site, archaeologists do not just find a uniform pit of dirt. They carefully peel back history in reverse, revealing a sequence of distinct horizontal layers. A dark, ashy layer might mark the destruction of the building by fire. Below that, they often find a series of remarkably level, compacted strata, each a few centimeters thick. These are the floors. Each one represents a separate resurfacing event, that annual renewal of the home. By studying the composition of these layers, the mix of clay, straw, and local materials, scientists can trace changes in resources, technology, and even climate over the lifetime of the building. But the floor's testimony goes far beyond its construction. Its surface holds a frozen moment of daily life. The very compaction tells a story. Areas near a doorway or in front of a long-vanished hearth will be worn harder and smoother, mapping the traffic patterns of a family centuries gone. It is a physical record of their most common paths through their own home. Then come the tiny, lost treasures. A floor was a perfect trap for small objects. A silver penny dropped and trodden into the clay, a broken pottery shard from a meal swept into a corner, a lost bone needle from sewing, a child's carved toy. These items were not deliberately buried. They were simply lost and then incorporated into the very fabric of the floor during the next resurfacing. For archaeologists, these are not just artifacts, they are direct connections to individual moments of forgetfulness or accident, giving names, dates, and personal touches to the space. Perhaps most fascinating is the invisible evidence. Advanced techniques can now analyze the soil chemistry of these floor layers. They can detect microscopic traces of organic materials long since decayed. Elevated levels of phosphates might indicate where animals were routinely penned inside. Traces of specific fatty acids can reveal where cooking fat spilled or where dairy was processed. Pollen grains preserved in the compacted earth can tell us what herbs are strewn for fragrance or even what crops were processed nearby. Together, this evidence transforms an empty plot of land into a vivid, three-dimensional blueprint of life. We can see not just where the walls stood, but where people cooked, where they gathered, where they worked, and where they relaxed. The floor becomes a silent witness that never forgets, recording the humble, human rhythm of centuries in its layered memory. This tangible evidence forces us to confront a final, profound shift, the moment when this ancient technology began to fade from use. To truly understand the earthen floor, we must step inside the home where it was most essential, the single-room peasant croft. Picture a long, low structure of timber and wattle, its thatched roof smelling of rain and smoke. Inside, there is no hallway, no separate kitchen, no bedroom. The entire world of a family unfolded within this one room, and its foundation was the floor. Every single activity of daily life, from sunrise to sleep, happened directly on or just above this compacted earth. At the very center, the heart of the home, was the hearth. This was not a fireplace in a wall, but a simple, shallow pit dug directly into the floor itself, lined with stones. Here, the fire burned constantly for cooking, warmth, and light. The earth around it was baked hard and stained with soot, a permanent testament to countless meals. The family would gather here to eat, their bowls in their laps, the warmth of the fire at their fronts, and the gentle, stored heat of the floor beneath them. At day's end, they would unroll their straw-filled pallets and sleep on that same floor, often with the youngest children closest to the hearth's fading embers for comfort. But this was not just a living and sleeping space, it was also a workshop. In one corner, a spinning wheel might hum, its operator's feet resting on the smooth earth. In another, repairs to a wooden plow or the weaving of a basket would take place, with all the chips and trimmings falling directly to the floor to be swept up later. The floor was the ultimate multi-purpose surface, resilient enough for a dropped tool, forgiving for a child's stumble, and warm for tired bones. In many such homes, especially in colder regions, the family's precious livestock, perhaps a cow or a few sheep, would be brought inside at night, penned at one end of the room. A low barrier of wood might separate their space, but they shared the same earthen floor. This was not a quaint custom, it was a survival strategy. The animals' body heat added warmth to the home, and their presence meant they could be cared for and protected from predators. The floor in this area would tell a different story, requiring more frequent attention to manage moisture and waste, a constant negotiation between utility and cleanliness. The condition of this all-encompassing floor was a direct, undeniable mirror of the family's fortune. A well-maintained, smooth, and dry floor spoke of a household with enough time, energy, and knowledge to care for their domain. It meant fewer illnesses from damp, fewer pests hiding in cracks, and a general sense of order. A neglected, rutted, and perpetually muddy floor, however, was a sign of struggle, of a family stretched too thin by labor or poor harvests to perform the essential rituals of sweeping and resurfacing. Historical records from manorial courts sometimes mention complaints about tenants letting their homes fall into disrepair, and a failing floor would have been a visible part of that decline. Modern reconstructions, like those at open-air museums, show us the profound practicality of this setup. Stepping into a faithfully recreated croft, you feel the solidity of the floor underfoot. Notice how the single space flows from hearth to work area to sleeping space, and understand how this engineered earth was not a passive backdrop, but the active living stage upon which the drama of medieval life was performed. It was a surface that demanded participation, and in return, it offered the fundamental gifts of warmth, durability, and a place to build a life. This intimate world of the single-room croft stands in stark contrast to the grandest domestic space of the era, the manor hall. Yet even here, in the home of a lord, the foundation remained the same packed earth. The difference was not in the base, but in the elaborate performance built upon it. The great hall was not merely a place to live, it was a theater of power, and its floor was the central stage. Over that hard, utilitarian earth, a thick, fragrant carpet of rushes, straw, or hay was regularly strewn. This practice is the literal origin of the phrase, "the floor is littered," but this litter was a deliberate, sophisticated system. Every few months, the old soiled layer would be shoveled out and carted away, often to be used as valuable fertilizer in the gardens, and a fresh, clean layer would be laid down. This cyclical renewal was a spectacle in itself, a visible demonstration that the Lord commanded the labor to constantly refresh his environment. The function of this organic carpet was multi-layered. First, it provided instant insulation and comfort underfoot, a soft, springy surface for those standing through long feasts or sleeping on the hall's benches at night. More practically, it acted as a giant, absorbent mat. During a riotous feast, bones could be tossed over the shoulder, wine and ale could be spilled, and greasy platters could be set down directly on the rushes. The covering soaked it all up, trapping the mess and odors within its depths until the next replacement. To combat the inevitable smells of food and crowded humanity, herbs were mixed into the strewing. Meadowsweet, chamomile, lavender, and mint were common choices. As people walked and danced upon them, these herbs were crushed underfoot, releasing their sweet, clean scents into the air, performing a natural form of air freshening that masked the earthier smells below. So the Lord's Hall presented a fascinating duality. Visually and aromatically, it proclaimed refinement and abundance through this costly, renewable carpet. Yet beneath that display, the floor was the same pragmatic, thermal mass earth found in a peasant's home, quietly doing the essential work of temperature regulation and durability. The Lord did not reject the technology of the earth floor. He simply concealed it beneath a layer of perishable luxury, a perfect metaphor for a society built upon the labor of the land, yet striving to rise above it. This theatrical covering, however, could not last forever, and its eventual abandonment reveals a deeper shift in how people viewed the ground beneath them. That fragrant carpet of rushes was only the beginning of a quiet revolution underfoot. As daily life unfolded on these earthen stages, people naturally sought to make them more comfortable, more beautiful, and more reflective of their status. This led to a fascinating evolution of floor coverings, each layer adding new meaning to the ground below. The most basic step beyond bare earth was the woven mat. These are not purchased, but crafted at home during the long winter months from materials gathered from the local landscape. Reeds from the riverbank, long grasses from the meadow, or straw left over from the harvest were carefully dried, then woven or braided into tight, durable rectangles. A simple mat placed by the hearth created a defined, warm spot for sitting. One laid by a bed space offered a little more cushion and insulation against the night's chill. These humble mats were the first step in personalizing the universal earth, carving out small islands of extra comfort within the home. They were also practical, protecting the most trafficked areas of the floor from excessive wear, making the annual resurfacing a bit easier. For those with more means, the next step was to cover larger areas. This is where the practice of strewing loose rushes truly became an art. It was not a haphazard toss of greenery. Specific plants were chosen for their properties. Sweet-smelling herbs like lavender and rosemary were prized, but so were tougher, springy plants like sedge or bracken, which lasted longer underfoot and had natural insect-repelling qualities. In some coastal areas, people gathered seaweed, which dried into a crisp, salty-scented layer that was remarkably resistant to fleas. The gathering itself was a seasonal task, often done by children or servants, tying the very floor to the rhythm of the local ecosystem. The laying was deliberate, building up a thick, even mattress that could be several inches deep. This created a literal cushion between the inhabitants and the hard-packed earth, a barrier that was soft, insulating, and disposable. But the most dramatic transformation came with the arrival of a true luxury object, the woven carpet. Initially, these exquisite textiles arrived in Europe from the East via trade routes, and they were far too precious to walk upon. They were treated as tapestries, hung on walls to display wealth and artistry, or draped over tables as sumptuous cloths. The idea of placing such a costly, delicate thing on the floor, where it would be subjected to dirt, ash, and boots, was almost unthinkable. Gradually, however, the logic shifted. As more carpets filtered into wealthy households, and as the desire to showcase opulence in every detail grew, they began their descent from the wall to the floor. First, they were placed in the most sacred and private spaces, like a chapel or a lord's private solar, where traffic was minimal and the act of removing one's shoes could be a sign of respect. A carpet laid upon an earthen floor performed a kind of magic. It instantly created a zone of unparalleled luxury and softness, visually and physically separating the Lord from the common earth of his great hall. It announced that in this space, the practical concerns of the ground were utterly conquered by art and commerce. This slow journey from strewn rushes to woven carpets fundamentally changed the relationship with the floor. The earth beneath was no longer the primary surface to be experienced. It became a hidden foundation, a structural necessity to be covered and forgotten. The focus shifted upward to the perishable or precious layer that could be changed with the seasons or displayed as treasure. The floor transformed from something you maintained to something you decorated, a silent signal that comfort was no longer just about warmth and durability, but about aesthetics and imported splendor. The specific texture underfoot depended entirely on the landscape outside your door. While the principle of a compacted earth floor was universal, its recipe changed dramatically from one valley to the next, a perfect example of medieval adaptation. Builders were masterful at using whatever the local geology provided. In the chalky downlands of southern England, for instance, floors were often made primarily of chalk itself. This soft, white stone was dug from pits, crushed, mixed with water, and compacted into a remarkably bright, clean-looking surface that reflected light beautifully inside a dim home. In other regions, they used marl, a crumbly, clay-rich soil that also contained lime. When wetted and tamped, marl hardened into a very durable floor that had the added benefit of slowly releasing minerals that help keep pests at bay. But perhaps the most famous regional variant was cob. In the West Country of England and parts of Wales, cob was not just for floors, but for building entire houses. For a floor, the mixture was a specific, time-tested formula. It started with a clay subsoil, which was then mixed with long, tough straw for tensile strength, and a generous amount of small gravel or crushed stone for drainage and stability. This trio, clay, straw, and aggregate, was kneaded with water, often by the hooves of oxen, into a stiff mass before being laid and pounded. A well-made cob floor was virtually indestructible, developing a stone-like hardness over years of use. Across the Channel in continental Europe, the variations continued. In regions with abundant river clay, floors were often made from almost pure clay, carefully selected for its plasticity and binding power. In parts of France and Germany, they might add animal hair, typically horse or cow, to the mix instead of or alongside straw. The hair created a dense, felt-like network within the clay that resisted cracking even better than plant fibers. In Scandinavia, where long winters demanded exceptional insulation, earthen floors were sometimes built up to a foot thick and might include layers of moss or peat beneath the final clay surface for extra warmth. These local recipes were not accidents. They were the accumulated wisdom of generations, a deep understanding of material science born from necessity. A builder in chalk country would not waste effort importing scarce clay, just as a farmer on the clay plains had no need for gravel hauled from distant hills. Each mixture was engineered to solve the same problems, creating a hard, dry, warm surface using a different set of local ingredients. This hyper-local adaptation meant the floor literally grounded a home in its place, made from the very substance of the land it sat upon. So, while a peasant in Somerset walked on a gravel-strengthened cob floor, and a burgher in Flanders walked on a hair-reinforced clay one, they both shared the same fundamental experience of a living, resilient earth beneath their feet. This ingenious use of local materials, however, would eventually be challenged by a new idea sweeping in from abroad, one that promised a floor that was not just maintained, but permanently finished. That deep connection to local soil could not last forever. As wealth accumulated and trade routes thickened, a new desire took root in the homes of the prosperous, a desire for a floor that was finished, not maintained. The first major challenger to earth was wood. Plank flooring made from split or sawn oak, elm, or pine began to appear in the upper chambers of manor houses and the townhomes of wealthy merchants. This was a profound change. Wood created a raised, clean platform, a literal separation from the ground. It signaled a rejection of the earth's damp and its constant need for renewal. In a solar or accounting room, a smooth wooden floor spoke of dryness, order, and privacy, a space for ledgers and fine cloth rather than hearth smoke and trampled rushes. But wood was still a precious commodity, requiring skilled carpenters and representing a significant investment of timber, so its use was deliberately selective. For ground floors and areas of heavy use, a more durable alternative emerged: brick. Fired clay pavers, often hexagonal or square, offered a perfect middle ground. They were harder and more permanent than earth, yet far cheaper and easier to produce than cut stone. Laid in intricate geometric patterns over a bed of sand, brick floors transformed kitchens, entranceways, and guild halls. They could be swept clean in moments and would last for generations, their warm, red hue adding a touch of civilized color to the interior. But the ultimate expression of this new permanence was the ceramic tile. Initially imported at staggering costs from Spain, the Netherlands, or even the Middle East, these glazed tiles were objects of art. They depicted coats of arms, biblical scenes, or intricate geometric patterns in vibrant blues, greens, and yellows. To own them was to announce participation in a wider world of commerce and taste. Eventually, local kilns began producing their own versions, making tiles more accessible to the gentry and prosperous monasteries. A tiled floor in a chapel or a great hall did not just cover the earth. It erased and replaced it with a fixed, beautiful narrative. It was a permanent installation, a declaration that this space was now complete and would not require the annual ritual of resurfacing. Even stone, once reserved for cathedrals, began its descent into domesticity. Flagstones, quarried locally, became a mark of solid, unshakable wealth in the ground floor halls of stone manor houses. Each of these materials, wood, brick, tile, and stone, shared a common promise. They were clean, permanent, and luxurious. Their adoption marked a slow but decisive cultural shift. The ideal floor was no longer a living, responsive partner in the home's ecosystem, but a static, finished surface that demonstrated control over nature itself. This was not a sudden revolution, but a creeping change in taste, fueled by growing disposable wealth and the networks of trade that made these materials attainable. The humble earth floor, once universal, was gradually redefined, becoming associated with the past, with rural life, and ultimately, with poverty. The shift from earth to tile was more than just a change in material. It represented a deeper shift in the human spirit. For centuries, that packed dirt floor carried a powerful symbolic weight, one deeply intertwined with medieval views on humility, virtue, and humanity's place in the natural order. In a world shaped by Christian faith, the earth was the substance from which God formed Adam, the dust to which all bodies would return. To live directly upon it was a constant, physical reminder of one's mortal origins and ultimate fate. This was not seen as depressing, but as a grounding truth. Nowhere was this symbolism embraced more deliberately than in the cells of monks and the huts of hermits. These individuals sought a life stripped of worldly vanity, and their choice of floor was a fundamental part of that ascetic practice, A bare, cold earthen floor was a tool for discipline, a daily penance that fostered humility and focused the mind on spiritual matters rather than bodily comfort. It was a deliberate rejection of luxury, a way to share symbolically in the poverty of Christ. The hermit, dwelling on his simple earth floor, was seen as being in a state of pure connection, not just with God, but with the very creation itself. His humble abode stood in stark, intentional contrast to the architectural ambition of the great churches and cathedrals rising across Europe. Those sacred spaces aimed for the heavens, their floors of polished stone or intricate mosaic designed to lift the gaze and the soul upward, away from the terrestrial mire. The cathedral floor represented the divine, eternal, and celestial, while the hermit's earthen floor represented the human, mortal, and earthly. This dichotomy played out vividly in the art and literature of the time. In illuminated manuscripts and panel paintings, scenes depicting the Nativity often show the Christ child in a stable with a simple earthen floor, emphasizing his humble, human entry into the world. The virtuous poor, saints in disguise, and wise old farmers were frequently situated in dwellings with visible packed earth floors, a visual shorthand for their authenticity, simplicity, and moral purity. In contrast, scenes of decadence or sin might be set in rooms with opulent tile or carpets, associating those finished floors with worldly pride and temptation. The rustic shepherd in a pastoral poem, a figure of idealized simplicity, was inseparable from his cottage and its earthen floor. This symbolism created a potent cultural association. Earth equaled humility, authenticity, and a virtuous connection to one's root. It was the floor of the honest laborer and the devout contemplative. So when a wealthy lord chose to retain an earthen floor in his great hall, even beneath its layer of rushes, he was perhaps performing a subtle act of symbolic grounding. It connected him, however tenuously, to the land he ruled and to an older ideal of lordly responsibility. The floor was a silent sermon, a reminder that all authority and wealth ultimately sprang from the same common soil. This deep symbolic resonance makes the eventual disappearance of the earth floor even more telling, signaling not just a change in comfort, but a fundamental rethinking of humanity's desired relationship with the ground beneath its feet. For all its ingenious benefits, the earth floor came with a list of very real and daily frustrations. Persistent damp was the most insidious foe. No matter how well compacted, an earthen floor was in constant conversation with the ground beneath it. In low-lying areas or during a wet season, moisture would wick upward, creating a chill that seeped into bones and belongings. This dampness was more than just uncomfortable, it was a health hazard. It encouraged the growth of mold and mildew in the very fabric of the home, their spores mingling with the smoke-filled air, contributing to coughs, rheumatic pains, and a general sense of malaise. The floor intended to provide warmth could, in the wrong conditions, become a source of pervasive cold and sickness. Then there were the uninvited inhabitants. The floor, especially with its organic straw binders and the inevitable crumbs of daily life, was a perfect habitat for insects. Fleas and lice could become a permanent, maddening presence in the rushes or the floor itself, nearly impossible to fully eradicate. Mice and rats burrowed along the edges where the floor met the wall, their scratching a nightly soundtrack and their droppings a constant contamination. The very materials that gave the floor its strength also gave shelter to these pests. The floor's character also changed dramatically with the weather. In a long dry spell, the constant traffic could grind the surface into a fine, airborne dust. This dust coated every surface, got into food, and filled the lungs, turning a sunny period into a gritty trial. Conversely, a spell of relentless rain or tracked-in snow near the doorway could transform that same surface into a patch of slick, stubborn mud. While a good floor drained well, a high-traffic entrance could still become a mire, requiring constant attention with fresh straw or ashes to soak up the mess. Finally, there was the problem of wear. Even the hardest packed earth was not immortal. Over years, the most common pathways from door to hearth, from hearth to bed, would slowly wear down, creating subtle ruts and depressions. These low spots would then hold water or debris, accelerating their own decay. The annual resurfacing was the solution, but it was a major chore, requiring the household to essentially move out for a day or more while the new layer dried. For a busy family, this maintenance could be postponed, letting small problems become big ones, so the earth floor was always a negotiation, a balance between its remarkable advantages and its stubborn flaws. It was a technology born of necessity, and the historical record is clear. As soon as people gained even a little wealth or access to new materials, they invested in changing their floors. The drive to lift themselves off the ground, to achieve a cleaner, drier, and more permanent surface, was one of the very first signs of domestic progress. This relentless pursuit of a better floor would quietly fuel a revolution in trade, industry, and even the layout of the home itself. That daily negotiation with dirt found its purpose in the heart of work. Beyond the living quarters, in the spaces dedicated to pure function, the earthen floor was not a compromise. It was the undisputed champion. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the medieval kitchen. This was a place of controlled chaos, dominated by a massive open hearth, and often a brick or stone baking oven built into the wall. Sparks and embers were a constant hazard, and a dropped coal was a routine event. A wooden floor here would have been a terrifying fire risk, a potential disaster waiting to happen. An earthen floor, however, was naturally fire-resistant. A stray ember would simply smolder and die out on its hard mineral surface, a critical safety feature that made the entire operation viable. The floor also dealt effortlessly with the inevitable messes of cooking, gallons of spilled broth, grease from roasting meat, or water from scrubbing pots. Unlike wood, which would rot, or stone, which had become treacherously slick, the packed earth simply absorbed these liquids and dried out, ready for the next day's onslaught. In the workshop, the story was similar. Take a blacksmith's forge. The floor around the anvil had to endure the shock of heavy hammer blows, the occasional drop of a red-hot horseshoe, and a constant rain of metal scale and ash. An earthen floor, compacted with clay and cinders from the forge itself, could take this brutal punishment year after year, simply wearing smoother. For a potter, the floor was a partner in the craft. Clay slurry, water, and broken shards were part of the daily landscape. A hard earth floor, perhaps sealed with a slurry of its own clay, created a surface that was easy to clean and immune to the stains and damage that would ruin a more delicate material. Weavers needed a stable, level surface for their large looms, and the non-slip quality of a well-trodden earth floor prevented the machine from shifting during the rhythmic work. In these functional spaces, the very qualities that made earth seem humble in a lord's solar made it indispensable. Its resilience was a form of armor. Its absorbency was a built-in cleanup crew. Its ability to be patched and resurfaced meant a workshop could endure decades of hard labor without a major renovation. Long after the family had saved up for wooden planks in the bedchamber, or the merchant had installed fine tiles in his counting room, the kitchen and the workshop would retain their traditional earthen floors. This was not a sign of being left behind. It was a mark of serious, practical wisdom. The floor here was a tool, as essential as the hearth or the anvil, chosen precisely because it could withstand what life threw at it. In these rooms, people did not dream of rising above the earth. They used its fundamental nature to build, create, and sustain. The resilience of that workshop floor finds its most intimate echo within the family home itself. The animals were not kept in a distant barn. They were often brought inside at night, sharing the very same beaten earth. This was standard practice, especially for a peasant family's most valuable assets, a cow for milk, a few sheep for wool, perhaps a pig fattening for winter. The floor was designed with this in mind. Its hard-packed, non-slip surface could withstand the clatter of hooves without cracking or turning to mud. Cleaning was a straightforward, if frequent, task. Animal waste was simply scraped up from the compacted earth, a far easier chore than trying to muck out a sodden, straw-filled stall. The waste itself was not wasted. It was collected and treasured as vital fertilizer for the vegetable patch, closing a practical loop in the household economy. The benefits of this arrangement were profound. On a freezing winter night, the body heat from a cow or a few sheep raised the temperature of the entire single-room dwelling, a living furnace that made the difference between discomfort and survival. Their presence also meant security, protecting the family's crucial wealth from thieves or wolves that might prowl beyond the thin timber walls. Yet the challenges were equally real. The line between the human and animal zones was often just a low wooden barrier or a change in the floor's texture. Smells, flies, and the inevitable sounds and stirrings of the animals were a constant part of domestic life. Managing hygiene was a daily discipline, requiring diligent sweeping and the regular addition of fresh, absorbent straw or bracken in the animal's corner to soak up moisture. This integrated existence paints a picture of medieval life that feels foreign to us, where the categories of clean and dirty, inside and outside, human and animal, were far more fluid. The floor was the common ground, literally, that made this intimate cohabitation possible. It was a surface that served multiple masters, equally forgiving of a child's foot, a dropped cooking pot, and the weight of a resting ox. This deep practicality, however, was about to meet an unstoppable force of change, one that would begin to sweep these ancient floors away for good. The floor itself seemed to breathe with the turning of the year, its character shifting with each season. Summer brought a relentless dryness, the sun baking the hard-packed surface until it released a fine, pale dust with every footstep. This dust hung in the shafts of light from open shutters, settling on tables and into bowls, a gritty reminder of the earth's presence even on the hottest days. Keeping it at bay meant more frequent, gentle sprinklings of water, a small daily ritual to calm the parched ground beneath the family's feet. Then came autumn with its rains and the harvest. The floor's true test began as mud and chaff were tracked inside on boots and tools. The area around the doorway transformed into a battle zone, a patch of stubborn damp that required constant vigilance with fresh straw or ashes to absorb the mess. This was the season of abundance, but also of tracked-in chaos, where the boundary between field and home grew indistinct. Winter, for all the floor's insulating warmth, presented its own deep chill. The stored heat from the hearth fought a constant, losing war against the frozen ground outside. The floor near the walls, away from the fire's direct reach, could grow so cold it seemed to leach the warmth from your very bones. People learned to move in established paths, staying within the narrow lanes of residual warmth that radiated from the central fire pit. The floor in winter was not uniformly cozy, it was a map of thermal geography with safe routes and cold deserts. Spring, then, was the great renewal. This was not a random choice of timing, but a deliberate synchronization with the agricultural calendar. After the last of the winter stores were eaten, and before the frantic planting season began, there came a brief window of relative calm. This was the time for the major resurfacing. The old, worn floor, cracked from winter frosts and stained from months of use, was broken up with mattocks. The family, perhaps with help from neighbors in a shared labor exchange, would mix a new batch of tempered clay and straw, hauling water from the spring now running fresh. The work of pounding and smoothing the new surface was backbreaking, but it was also a ritual of hope and purification, a literal grounding of the home for the year to come. Just as the fields outside were being plowed and sown, the interior landscape was being made fresh and fertile. The rhythm of the floor was the rhythm of survival itself, an intimate, physical bond between the domestic sphere and the relentless, nurturing cycle of the natural world. The persistent image of the medieval home as a universally filthy pit is perhaps our greatest misconception. It is a caricature that collapses 1,000 years of diverse living into a single, muddy stereotype. The truth, revealed through household records and the silent testimony of archaeology, is far more nuanced, a story of constant, intelligent negotiation with dirt. People were not indifferent to filth, they were pragmatically engaged in a daily battle against it, and their earth floor was a primary weapon in that fight. Consider the practical reality of living in a single room with your family, your animals, and your food stores. Letting waste accumulate was not merely unpleasant, it was a direct threat to health and survival. Rotting material bred disease, attracted rats that could spoil precious grain, and created a stench that would have made life unbearable. The idea that families simply wallowed in this for generations defies basic human logic and the evidence we have. Manuscripts known as household manuals, written for the managers of large estates, are filled with meticulous instructions for cleanliness. They dictate the regular sweeping of halls, the frequent replacement of floor rushes, and the scouring of utensils. These were not suggestions for luxury, but rules for maintaining a functional, healthy environment for dozens of people living in close quarters. The archaeological record supports this completely. When excavating a well-maintained home, scientists do not find a uniform layer of compacted garbage. They find distinct, clean floors, often with a layer of fine sand or ash deliberately spread as a final, cleanable surface. They find central hearths carefully kept clear of debris, and waste pits located conveniently outside the door, not heaped in the corner. The earth floor itself facilitated this hygiene. Its hard, sealed surface could be swept clean of food scraps and ashes in moments. Spills were absorbed and dried, rather than pooling into stagnant puddles. The annual resurfacing ritual was the ultimate act of domestic purification, literally scraping away the old year's grime and laying down a fresh, clean foundation. This does not mean every home was spotless by our modern standards. Cleanliness existed on a spectrum dictated by time, energy, and resources. A widow struggling to farm or plot alone might have a harder time keeping pace than a prosperous yeoman's wife with help. A rainy autumn could turn any entranceway into a mire faster than a broom could handle. The point is not that medieval homes were clinically sterile, but that they operated with a different, highly practical definition of order. Dirt was a fact of life, but it was a managed fact. The earth floor was not the source of the filth. It was the resilient, renewable canvas upon which this daily drama of domestic order was performed. It was a system designed for control, not surrender. The language we speak still carries the imprint of those compacted floors. Consider the term dirt poor. This phrase did not originally describe someone living in squalor, but something far more specific. It referred to a family so impoverished they could not afford to resurface their earthen floor. Their home's foundation was literally worn down to the bare, uncompacted dirt, a visible sign of having fallen completely out of the cycle of maintenance and renewal. It was the final stage of domestic decline. In contrast, to be on the ground floor of something speaks to a position of fundamental access and origin, a direct connection to the foundation of an enterprise, just as the earth floor was the foundational layer of every home. Even the phrase, "to earn your salt," connects to this domestic landscape. Salt was a costly, vital preservative, often purchased in a solid block. If you were careless and spilled this precious commodity, it might vanish into the cracks and dust of an earthen floor, a literal waste of your wages. To earn your salt meant you were valuable enough to afford this luxury without carelessly losing it to the ground beneath you. This reverence for the floor extended into the realm of magic and belief. The threshold of a home was not just a wooden beam. It was a sacred boundary between the safe, ordered world inside and the chaotic, unknown outside. This boundary was physically rooted in the compacted earth of the floor itself. People would often bury protective objects beneath the threshold or under the hearth to safeguard the home. Archaeologists frequently find these concealed treasures: a horse skull to ward off evil spirits, a worn shoe to ensure fertility, or a simple coin for prosperity, all sealed within the floor's fabric. The hearth, the literal heart of the home, was a pit dug directly into that earthen floor. It was more than a source of heat. It was a spiritual anchor, a living connection to the center of domestic life. Folklore is rich with rituals tied to this spot, from making promises over the fire to the belief that the household's luck resided in the ashes. To harm the hearth was to attack the family's very soul, grounded in the earth. These practices reveal a profound truth. The floor was not just a physical surface. It was a living membrane between the practical and the supernatural, between daily labor and deeply held hope. Its soil held more than straw and clay. It held the hidden intentions of those who walked upon it. This intimate, symbolic world began to crack apart in the 14th century. The catalyst was not a new invention, but a profound demographic catastrophe, the Black Death. In its wake, the very economics that made earth floors universal were turned upside down. The plague wiped out perhaps half of Europe's population, creating a desperate shortage of labor. Suddenly, the peasant or craftsman who survived found their work in high demand. Wages soared, and for the first time, many ordinary families had a little disposable income. One of the first things they chose to spend it on was improving their homes, and lifting themselves off the dirt floor was a top priority. The old system, where labor was abundant and materials scarce, reversed. Now, labor was expensive, but commercially produced materials like bricks, tiles, and sawn timber became more accessible as merchants scrambled to meet this new domestic demand. Paying for a load of bricks or a stack of floorboards was suddenly a feasible dream, a tangible way to use hard-won wages to secure comfort and status. This shift was powerfully reinforced by a new cultural wind blowing from the south, the Renaissance. As scholars rediscovered the architectural ideals of ancient Rome and Greece, a new aesthetic took hold among the wealthy and aspirational. Classical architecture valued permanence, symmetry, and refined materials. It celebrated stone, marble, and orderly brickwork, not humble, mutable earth. To have an earthen floor in your great hall now seemed rustic, backward, even barbaric. A relic of a darker age one was eagerly behind. The ideal home was no longer a living organism rooted in its local soil, but a static, beautiful object that demonstrated learning and taste. This intellectual movement provided the perfect justification for covering up the old floors, framing it not as mere comfort, but as cultural advancement. At the same time, the very concept of the home was transforming. The medieval single-room croft, where life, work, and sleep all happened in one communal space, began to fracture. The early modern era saw a growing desire for privacy and specialization. People wanted separate kitchens away from living areas, private bedrooms for family members, dedicated parlors for receiving guests, and studies for quiet work. This new layout of specialized rooms demanded specialized floors. An earthen floor was perfectly suited to the multifunctional chaos of a great hall, but it was ill-fitted for a room meant for fine furniture, delicate textiles, or quiet contemplation. In a parlor, you wanted a smooth, splinter-free wooden floor that could be polished, or a tiled floor that could be easily mopped clean, surfaces that supported a more refined and compartmentalized way of living. The floor became a marker of a room's specific purpose, and earth, the universal material, had no place in this new domestic taxonomy. The decline was not a sudden extinction, but a long, uneven retreat. In rural cottages and farmsteads, earthen floors persisted for centuries, their practicality outweighing fashion. But in towns, in the homes of the gentry, and along the major trade routes, the change was decisive. By the 17th and 18th centuries, to have an earthen floor in the main living spaces of a prosperous home was a sign of being hopelessly out of date or of genuine poverty. The Great Disappearance was complete, not because the technology failed, but because the world that required it had vanished. The floor was no longer a partner in survival. It had become a furnishing, a final, silent confirmation that humanity had successfully walled itself off from the ground it came from. Yet that ancient technology never truly vanished. It was simply forgotten, buried under centuries of industrial progress and mass-produced materials. Today, in a fascinating full circle, the medieval earth floor is experiencing a quiet but profound revival. This is not a historical reenactment, but a forward-looking choice made by architects, builders, and homeowners seeking sustainable, healthy living spaces. The very qualities that made Earth indispensable 1,000 years ago are now being rediscovered as solutions to modern problems. Its excellent thermal mass is a passive solar dream, naturally regulating indoor temperatures and drastically reducing the need for mechanical heating and cooling. The materials are completely non-toxic, just local clay, sand, and straw, creating a floor that off-gasses nothing but the clean scent of the earth itself. This approach has what builders call incredibly low embodied energy, meaning almost no fossil fuels are burned to manufacture or transport its components. The aesthetic is uniquely beautiful, offering a warm, organic, and subtly textured surface that feels alive underfoot. Modern practitioners are not simply copying old methods, they are refining them. While the core ingredients remain the same, they now sometimes incorporate natural stabilizers like linseed oil or plant-based resins to increase durability and water resistance, creating floors that can last for decades with minimal care. This modern earth floor is a direct descendant of the medieval original, a testament to a simple truth. Sometimes the most advanced solution is also the most ancient. It represents a conscious decision to step away from the disposable, high-energy culture of modern construction and reconnect with a material logic that is both deeply practical and inherently graceful. In choosing an earthen floor today, one is not stepping backward into the past, but stepping onto a foundation that links medieval ingenuity with 21st century ecological wisdom. This journey across 1,000 years of floors forces us to see the medieval home with new eyes. We began by brushing aside the dusty stereotype of universal filth and instead discovered a world built upon a foundation of profound intelligence. The earthen floor was not a failure of technology, but its brilliant peak within a world of scarce resources. It was a universal solution, a triumph of adaptation, offering natural insulation against the cold, astonishing affordability, and a resilient flexibility that accommodated everything from feasts to forges. This humble surface actively shaped the rhythm of daily life, from the morning sweep to the annual resurfacing that mirrored the seasons. It silently reinforced the social order, marking the distance from a peasant's well-kept clay to a lord's herb-strewn hall. It even shaped a worldview, serving as a physical reminder of humility and humanity's connection to the soil. To walk on an earth floor was to participate in a deeply grounded reality. Reframing this, we see that medieval domesticity was not a dark age of dirt, but an age of grounded genius. It was a time when people did not conquer their environment from a distance, but brought a piece of it intelligently indoors, tempering it, compacting it, and living in a practical partnership with the ground of their very being. The floor was the first and most fundamental layer of home, a testament to the enduring human ability to build comfort and meaning from the simplest materials underfoot. The next time you visit a castle ruin or walk through an old village, pause for a moment and look down. That patch of bare, compacted earth you see might not be just the ground, it could be the floor. A silent, 1,000-year-old stage where people cooked, celebrated, worked, and slept. History is not always found in grand statues or stained glass. Sometimes it is written in the very dirt beneath our feet, in layers of clay and memory. We would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever felt the worn smoothness of an ancient stone step, or noticed the uneven, hard-packed earth in an old cottage? What are your thoughts on bringing these sustainable, ancient materials back into modern building? If this journey through the hidden world of medieval floors gave you a new perspective, please give this video a like and subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover the gritty, practical, and endlessly fascinating mysteries of everyday life in the past.